Hello, everyone, and welcome to AgriTalk, day number 2 of the National Association of Farm Broadcasting Convention in Kansas City. Busy day here. We have a lot to talk about. Gregg Doud, Chief Economist for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, is going to join us momentarily. We're also going to talk with Bob Stallman, President of the American Farm Bureau Federation and the new Chairman of the U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Coalition. And we'll talk with Bart Schott from the National Corn Growers, who's also an officer with this new Farmers and Ranchers Association. So that's coming up on our program. We talk about that alliance. We're going to talk about the GIPSA situation and also South Korea with Gregg Doud. We're also going to talk a little bit about finance with folks from Rabo Agri-Finance. We're also going to get into some fertilizer things with Agritain. So we have a lot of ground to cover on our program today from here in Kansas City. Let's take a quick look at the news. A bipartisan group of senators is calling on Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid to include biofuels language in the energy bill and to consider legislation to extend the volumetric ethanol excise tax credit. The ethanol tax incentive is currently set to expire December 31st. In a letter to Reid, the senators point out that both steps are crucial to the effort of reducing the nation's dependence on foreign sources of oil, creating jobs in the U.S., and addressing the issue of climate change. And EPA is making available guidance and tools to help state and local air permitting authorities identify cost-effective pollution reduction options for greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act. Emissions from small sources such as farms and restaurants are not covered by these permitting requirements. Ag Secretary Vilsack, who we'll be talking with later today, called EPA's announcement a meaningful step forward in recognizing the potential role that energy from biomass can play in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We have a lot to talk with Secretary Vilsack about later today. We'll be recording an interview with him this afternoon. That will be part of our broadcast tomorrow. That's a quick check on the news brought to you by AuctionTime.com, your one-stop shop for heavy-duty trucks, farm equipment, and construction equipment this season. AuctionTime.com has no buyer's fees, no hidden reserves, and you can register for free. Save time and money by visiting AuctionTime.com today. Quick reminder for those of you in the Hutchinson, Minnesota area, our friends at KDUZ and KARP Radio invite you to stop by at their annual Farm City Day celebration tomorrow from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. at the McLeod County Fairgrounds in Hutchinson. Have a free breakfast, a lot of entertainment, free prizes as well. Always a good time. Stop by their Farm City Day tomorrow in Hutchinson. All right, this, by the way, is Veterans Day, of course, and we salute all of our veterans and thank them for their service to our country. Joining us now is Gregg Doud, Chief Economist for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Yesterday, there was a press conference here in Kansas City with some more economic analysis of the proposed GIPSA livestock marketing rules. The study, which was released yesterday, conducted by Informa Economics on behalf of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, National Meat Association, the National Pork Producers Council, and the National Turkey Federation, showed that this rule would result in job losses of more than 22,800, with an annual drop in gross domestic product by as much as $1.56 billion and an annual loss in tax revenues of $359 million. Gregg Doud, thank you for joining us. Some pretty significant potential impact that you're pointing out in this study from Informa if these rules go into effect.
Well, I think the purpose of that study was to show now we have two studies. In lieu of any study from the government, that under the weeds of regulation in Washington, D.C., what those regulations say is anytime you have an impact on an industry over $100 million, it mandates a cost-benefit analysis. Well, the government hasn't done a cost-benefit analysis on this GIPSA rule, but now you have two studies that are way in excess of that $100 million threshold, more than 10 times in excess of that threshold. And it really, from my experience in Washington and seeing many, many regulations go through, it just really baffles me how this thing got to this point without triggering that economic analysis.
Yeah, when I asked Secretary Vilsack about that, he said they had done an economic analysis.
Well, I've had a hard time finding it, and in fact, there's no dollar figure associated with that analysis. What they're attempting to say is, well, from a record-keeping standpoint, there isn't any additional cost. Well, the regulation, the rule, and the law actually say that it impacts indirect, direct cost, and anything else. And you have to stop and think about this. The sale of cattle and calves at the farm gate in this country is $50 billion, almost 20% of farm income. it doesn't take a very large pebble in the pond to make a $100 million ripple. And what we're doing here. So I think that's the reason 115 members of Congress have asked for an economic analysis. I mean, it kind of defies logic that something that the Secretary said is the most important regulation they've ever done doesn't trigger this threshold.
What do you say to those supporting of the GIPSA rules that say we have to do something about packer concentration?
Well, the interesting thing about packer concentration, it hasn't changed in 15 years. Farmers and ranchers at the cow-calf level, we've made money 20 of the last 25 years. So I'm hard-pressed to understand why there is such a great crisis in farm country and everybody's going broke. Rancher is actually, by far, if you look at the data and what's going on, he's done the best of either the feedlot or the processing side of this sector, or even the retail side of this sector for some time. If you go and look at Tyson's balance sheet, it's a wreck, and where it really pulls down is on the beef side of the equation. There is a frustrating thing and point that they make in terms of the margins in this business, and there's going to be a big, another Department of Justice workshop on December 8th about this, talking about, well, the margins are out of whack between the producer and the processor and the retailer. This is something that we've raised with USDA for years, is the data doesn't suffice here. The data that USDA collects on meat prices is incorrect. It's not a weighted price based upon the volume of sales. It's just more of a sticker price. That is a very important thing that we've got to get changed.
Talking with Gregg Doud, Chief Economist for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. More on GIPSA. We'll talk South Korea and the estate tax when we come back here to Kansas City, National Association Farm Broadcasting Convention. This is AgriTalk. Welcome back to AgriTalk from Kansas City, the National Association Farm Broadcasting Convention. Gregg Doud, Chief Economist for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, is with us. Greg, throughout this whole GIPSA rule proposal process, I have had the feeling, and I've said this a number of times, that USDA just appears to me that they've already made up their mind, even though the public comment period goes on. They've made up their mind they want to push this through and that they're going to push it through. If that happens, what recourse to those of you that oppose it? What recourse do you have?
Well, the strange thing about that, if you're right, is that the rule is so incredibly vague that it makes it very difficult to understand where they're going to go after if they do begin to push something through like that. The way this is supposed to work in the Administrative Procedures Act is that the questions and the comments come in, and whatever questions are in those comments about the issues and the vagueness of this regulation, they're supposed to, before they promulgate the final rule, they're supposed to answer those questions. And we have a lot of questions. And the question is going to be how long it takes for them to do that, how do they answer those questions, and then what goes on. They can either do an interim final rule where they can have another comment period before the rule goes into effect, or they can just run it on through. We don't know yet how all this is going to work.
I'm going to ask about that when I talk to Secretary Vilsack this afternoon. So later this month is really when the decision could come.
Well, it could come yet this year. It could come in several months. It takes some. It's hard to understand how long it takes them to go through this process. Then, if it's a economically significant rule, and is deemed that if they haven't a process, that actually triggers, I think it's a 60-day period by which Congress can look at this regulation and have its say on what goes on. Congress has another bite at the apple here as well in terms of the appropriations process, etc. So there's a lot of different avenues and ways this could go before it goes into effect.
By then it'd be a new Congress.
You would think that's exactly right. One would have to assume.
A couple of other topics. We see on the news President Obama saying that a trade deal with South Korea could be a few weeks away. Are you hearing anything different on that?
Well, so far what we're hearing is it isn't going real well. You see that in the media. Actually, that doesn't surprise me too much. I think my word today is patience. We're going to have patience on this issue with South Korea. We've been patient, and it's paid off for us in the beef industry. We're going to sell South Korea close to $500 million worth of beef this year. We're all the way back not to 2003, the $815 million that we did, but overall in the U.S. this year, I think there's a real good chance that we'll match the $3.9 billion that we did in 2003 pre-BSE. And that's amazing when you consider we're still missing about $1 billion plus because we haven't got into China yet. We're still at 20 months in Japan. The export thing has been real good to us this year. The value of the dollar has been a huge component of this and the strength in these Asian economies. I'm very worried, though, that the Australians are doing their own free trade agreement with Korea, and they would beat us into the punch into that market next year. We've got to get this thing done.
The estate tax, we're not that far from December 31st. Do you see something coming up in this lame duck session?
That's the great question that we have to ask in this lame duck is how we address these tax issues. I'm a small business owner myself. My wife and I are. And, like most small businesses in this country, everybody's kind of holding back a little cash right now because you don't know what your tax liability is. Well, you multiply that on a macro level, that's what's a drag on this economy is the enormous uncertainty of what our tax policy is going to be, what some of these regulations are going to be. We have to get certainty in our economy so we can move forward. That's why this is job one for Congress, whether it's in the lame duck or immediately when they come back next year. I'm not sure from reading the tea leaves yet exactly when they're going to address this, but I think you're beginning to see these new folks come to town with one job on their mind, and that's the job that needs to be on their mind.
Full repeal doesn't seem likely. Have you, as NCBA, decided on what level of in between or compromise that you could accept?
Well, I think there's three kind of proposals out there that we're keeping an eye on. There's the $3.5 million threshold, there's talk of a $5 million threshold, and I think there's talk of an ag exemption out there as well. Which horse is going to be the one that everybody gets on and rides here? I don't think we know yet, but the point is any one of those is better than what we're going to have happen on January 1.
Yeah, the uncertainty, as you said, is a problem, but the potential there of the harm that could be done is certainly significant.
It absolutely could devastate the ability to pass on farms and ranches here. I mean, $1 million in what we do today is just a very, very low threshold. And taxing at 55% above anything, that's just completely outrageous. And I think the point is, I think Congress and the new Congress coming in gets that. I think they know that that's job one coming forward, and it's, our job is going to be holding their feet to the fire.
All right, Greg, good to talk with you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Gregg Doud, Chief Economist for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Coming up later in the program, Bart Schott, the president of the National Corn Growers Association, and Bob Stallman, president of the American Farm Bureau Federation, will join us to talk about the newly formed U.S. Farmers and Ranchers Association. That alliance is being put together. They are getting more organized now. They had a press conference here today in Kansas City. We'll be talking about that. And also coming up next, we're going to talk some financial matters with Rabo AgriFinance. Later, we're going to talk some fertilizer issues with Agritain. We have a lot of ground yet to cover. It's a busy, busy day here in Kansas City at the National Association of Farm Broadcasting Convention. Back with more on AgriTalk.